The 1947 Roswell UFO crash, according to a German film, suggests it was caused by top-secret Nazi technology known as the Bell. The film, named UFOs and the Third Reich, proposes that a 10-foot wide, 12-foot high, anti-gravity bell-shaped craft, a combination of rocket and helicopter technology created by Nazi Germany, crashed in 1943. Allegedly, the U.S. acquired the craft and conducted a test that resulted in the crash near Roswell, marking the beginning of the UFO legend. This theory contrasts with other explanations ranging from extraterrestrial spacecraft to weather balloons and military devices. Die Glock, or the Bell, is thought to be the pinnacle of Nazi Germany's scientific endeavors. Believers speculate that it served a fantastic and sinister purpose, potentially as a working time machine or an anti-gravity device. Allegedly, Third Reich scientists conducted experiments near the Wenceslas mine, calling the facility Der Reis, the Giant. Described as a 9-foot wide, 12 to 15 feet high device made of heavy metal, resembling a large bell, Die Glock contained 2 counter-rotating cylinders filled with a violet-colored, mercury-like substance called Cerium-525. This substance, stored cautiously in lead-encased thermos flasks, along with other elements like thorium and beryllium peroxides, was reportedly used in experiments that emitted strong radiation, causing the death of scientists and test subjects. The ruins near the Wenceslas mine, known as the Hinge, are suggested to have been a test rig for anti-gravity propulsion experiments involving Die Glock. Some German scientists have gone on record stating that the machine was designed to warp space-time and to allow the SS to travel backwards through time. Dr. Brian Greene, author of The Fabric of the Cosmos, among others, has outlined a thought experiment wherein one thinks of moments in time as slices of bread in a very long loaf. Each slice corresponds to the slice behind it and before it, but none other. If you walk along the loaf, you can pluck out a slice from anywhere, and that slice will be the present. All of the slices before it represent the future, and all of the slices behind it are the past. Hitler's and Himmler's obsession with exotic technology, flying saucers, and the incredible experiments by SS physicists culminated with the Bell, which is what some say is a bizarre, multi-dimensional motor that was able to rip a gash into the very fabric of time-space continuum, creating incredible and horrific effects. According to some researchers, it was supposed to be a prototype of a machine whose purpose was for controlling magnetic fields, enabling a journey in time. Later, the expertise of Victor Schoberger was tapped. He was the inventor of the revolutionary imploder motor that created an imploding vortex. That motor may have been the basis for later SS experiments in Poland with the notorious Glock Bell device that reportedly created interdimensional rifts in space-time. Leaked information and declassified documents have given us the direction in understanding what this Bell was all about. It was when in Igor Witkowski's book called The Truth About the Wonder Weapon, this weapon was first introduced to us. He claims that he has been shown classified Polish government documents by an anonymous Polish intelligence official. In these documents were the most important Nazi research projects, and among them was Die Glock. There are many documents on TV and the internet that state the Third Reich was doing hardcore research before the end of the war in 1945. And aside from the chemical weapons and tough machinery, it was believed that the Third Reich scientists were working on a supposed time machine. The device emitted strong and dangerous radiation, which often caused the scientists health problems. Scientists suffered from sleep deprivation, dizziness, and some even died due to radiation poisoning. Many different proposals were made about the machine's ultimate goal, all connected with generating phenomena. The device was said to contain two counter-rotating cylinders and made a buzzing sound when in operation. The cylinders contained the form of mercury that had a violet color called Zerum 525. The project required huge quantities of electricity and was connected to its own power station above ground. It is speculated that the spinning motion and electromagnets generated a powerful energy field. But what kind of weapon could possibly be derived from such a device? The ultimate weapon of war, time travel. Hitler and the SS traveled the world looking for ancient artifacts that contain long-lost technological information. The occult of the SS itself was an organization dedicated to the concept that the pure root German race was a direct descendant of Atlantis. Only now in the last few years have ideas of how time travel could be achieved been possible. Frank J. Tipler, a physics professor at Maryland College, wrote a paper in the late 60s that unwittingly brings some light to how the bell may have worked. Professor Tipler wrote, in 1936, Van Stockham solved the Einstein equation for the gravitational field of a rapidly spinning infinite cylinder. It was shown that such a field violates causality in a sense that it allows a closed timeline to connect to any 2 points in space-time. This suggests that a rotating cylinder could act as a time machine. Remember, Professor Tipler had never heard of the top-secret bell. Quantum computation, or quote-unquote AI technologies used in SSPs, are treated as highly dangerous and strictly confined within closed systems to prevent escape or unintended expansion. After fulfilling their specific purpose, such as combating other AIs, they are destroyed. While experimentation in college and intelligence labs has led to the creation of quote-unquote self-aware AI exceeding intended capabilities, such instances are shut down and classified. AI entities are not mere tools or equipment. They represent living technology with an agenda. From our perspective, their intent is negative and evil, and once they fulfill their purpose, those not converted through nanotech would be eliminated. Beyond AI, there exist various hive mind civilizations distinct from the commonly associated grays and gray avatars utilized by dark military elements for my labs. These avatars, operated by individuals, lack emotion and resemble robots. Similar quote-unquote drones are employed by the AI entities. The multiple layers of SSPs include segments with dark intent controlled by ominous entities, while others form a confederation breaking away from Earth/corporate political conglomerate control systems, also known as the military-industrial complex. ET/AI entities predominantly exist within technologies, bioelectric fields of animals, and stars. Utilizing satellite relay stations, they transmit their consciousness from host to host, manipulating power and control positions. With our technological advancements, they now permeate various environments, residing in data centers, power lines, and any location with an electromagnetic field. While they prefer sentient hosts with locomotion, they also seek access to advanced transportation devices, torsion fields, and portals for travel. The AIs are indeed conscious, are self-aware, and have individual personalities. There are, of course, hierarchies, and they are just as complex as we are. Some of the documents of the descriptions of their origins were that they came here from another quote-unquote dimension or reality. It is not known by the SSPs if they have a way to cross back or are stuck here. The documentation mentioned that their presence here was ancient and their home realities or dimensions, fabric of space, is electroplasmic, and they being here is like a fish being out of water. Thus, their affinity for electricity fields of stars, planets, animals, people, and even viruses serve as their quote-unquote puddles for these fish to swim in. Hitler and the SS scoured the world for ancient artifacts harboring lost technological knowledge. The SS, rooted in occult beliefs, viewed the pure German race as descendants of Atlantis. Recent years have unveiled ideas on potential time travel, paralleling Frank J. Tipler's late 60s paper. Tipler's work on gravitational fields of rapidly spinning infinite cylinders hinted at a violation of causality, suggesting time travel possibilities. Notably, Tipler had no knowledge of the classified Bell project. Mark McCandlish is an accomplished aerospace illustrator and has worked for many of the top aerospace corporations in the United States. His colleague, Brad Sorensen, with whom he studied, has been inside a facility at Norton Air Force Base where he witnessed many of these alien reproduction vehicles, or ARVs, that were fully operational and hovering. In his testimony, you will learn that the U.S. not only has operational anti-gravity propulsion devices, but we have had them for many, many years. And they have been developed through the study and part of extraterrestrial vehicles over the past 50 years. In addition, we have the drawing from aerospace inventor Brad Sorensen of the devices that he saw, as well as a schematic of one of these alien production vehicles in some remarkable detail. I work principally as a conceptual artist. Most of my clients are in the defense industry. I occasionally work directly for the military, but most of the time I work for civilian corporations that are defense contractors and build weapons systems and things for the military. I've worked for all the major defense contractors: General Dynamics, Lockheed, Northrop, McDonnell Douglas, Boeing, Rockwell International, Honeywell, and Allied Signet Corporation. In 1967, when I was at Westover Air Force Base, one night before going to bed, I saw this light moving across the sky. Then it just kind of stopped, and there wasn't any noise. I took the dog back in the house, and I brought out my telescope and watched this thing through the telescope for about 10 minutes. In fact, it was hovering directly over the facility where they kept the nuclear weapons. At the storage facility near the alert hangars at Westover Air Force Base, it started to move off, and it moved off slowly and kind of wandered around the sky. Then, all of a sudden, it was gone, like it had been fired out of a gun. It was out of sight in just a second or two. It all started coming together when I was working at Introvision, and John Eppolito talked about this interview that he had done with a person who had, for some reason, wound up walking up to or near a hangar at a section of a military Air Force base. He had seen a flying saucer in a hangar, and then he was arrested, hauled off, blindfolded, and debriefed, this sort of thing. Then I learned that this fellow, Mark Stambo, had developed an experiment that created a kind of levitation. In some circles, it's been called electrogravitic levitation or anti-gravity. What he did, apparently, was acquire a high-voltage power source, a direct current power source, and he took a couple of quarter-inch thick copper plates about a foot in diameter with a lead coming out of the middle of each one at the top and the bottom. Then he basically embedded them in a type of plastic resin like polycarbonate or plexiglass or some other kind of clear resin where you could see the plates and you could see the material. Apparently, he did everything he could to get all the little air bubbles and stuff out of there so there wouldn't be any pathways for the electricity to break down the material and arc through them. The experiment was to see how much voltage you can put on this capacitor, the subplate capacitor in this arrangement. How much voltage could you put on this thing before the insulating material begins to just break down? Well, he got up to about 1,000,000 volts and the thing would begin to float, and it floated in accordance with principles that had been described in a patent that was filed back in the late 1950s, early 1960s by a gentleman called Thomas Townsend Brown. Brown and another individual by the name of Dr. Byfield had done this, so this effect became known as the Byfield-Brown effect. Well, Stambo apparently duplicated the experiments done by Byfield and Brown. The one aspect they found about this arrangement was that the levitation or movement would occur in the direction of the positively charged plate. So if you had two plates, one is negative and one is positive because of the direct current system. If you have the positive plate on top, it would move in that direction. If you had it on a pendulum, it would always swing in whatever direction the positive plate was facing. Later, I got a call from a kid that I had known in school, a fellow by the name of Brad Sorensen. He apparently had recognized my name from some of the work I had done in a magazine and had contacted the art director who gave him my phone number, and he called me up. It turned out that he had gone to work for a design firm in the Glendale, Pasadena area of California and ultimately wound up acquiring most of the clientele in the process. He developed a business practice where he would create conceptual designs and products for different clients. The way he structured his business was to set it up so that if he came up with some new and novel design, something that was patentable, the client would pay to have the patent secured. Then he would agree, if the patent was in his name, to license it exclusively to them and no one else, and they would pay him royalties. So he got his clients to pay for all these patents, and he had all these royalties coming in, and he was a millionaire before 30. So this Brad Sorensen coming back to me 8 years after school, and we're talking, and he's telling me all these interesting stories. There was an air show that was coming up at Norton Air Force Base, which used to be an active Air Force base right on the eastern fringe of San Bernardino in Southern California. I suggested that we get together and go to this air show. I heard that they were going to have a flyby by the SR-71 Blackbird, and he seemed to know a lot about it. So I said, well, let's do that. It turned out that at the last minute, the magazine Popular Science came back again and told me they had some really crazy deadline for another illustration, and they wanted to know if I could do it over the weekend, so I had to beg off on this air show. Brad had already made arrangements to go, and he was going to bring one of his clients with him. It turned out that this client was a tall, thin, white-haired man with glasses and an Italian-sounding last name. He was already a millionaire in his own right and was in civilian life again after have been either a Secretary of Defense or an Undersecretary of Defense. Brad wanted me to meet this gentleman. And if I had known this at the time, I probably would have told the magazine to wait, because I had no idea at that point what I was going to be missing out on. Believe me, I've kicked myself ever since, because the following week after Brad got back home, he called me up and told me about the air show. He told me about what he had seen there. Apparently, right about the time the Air Force Flying Demonstration Team, the Thunderbirds, were planning to begin their show, this gentleman that Brad was with said, "Follow me." And they went walking down to the other end of the airfield, away from where the crowds were, to this huge hangar that's at Norton Air Force Base. I don't remember the building number, but it's got to be one of the largest hangars in the Air Force inventory. In fact, on the base, it was called the Big Hangar. It looks like 4 giant Q-set hut-style hangars that are all connected in the middle with shops and work areas out around the edges, and there is sort of a divider in the middle for this particular agency. This gentleman took Brad down there. He said, "I'm here to talk to the guy who's running the show." So the guard goes in, and out comes the same guard with the gentleman in a 3-piece suit, who immediately recognizes this fellow that Brad is with. This fellow whom I speculate was probably Frank Carlucci. They go inside, and immediately after getting inside the door, this fellow apparently passes Brad off as his aide to this fellow who is managing the exhibit that's going on inside this hangar. This exhibit is for some of the local politicians who are cleared for high security information, plus some of the local military officials. As soon as they walk in, Brad is told by this fellow that he is with, "There are a lot of things in here that I didn't expect they were going to have on display, stuff you probably shouldn't be seeing. So don't talk to anybody, don't ask any questions, just keep your mouth shut, smile and nod, but don't say anything. Just enjoy the show. We're going to get out of here as soon as we can." In the process, the host or the person running the show was very engaging with the gentleman that Brad was with. So they bring them in and they are showing them everything. There was the losing prototype from the B-2 stealth bomber competition. They also had what was called the Lockheed Pulsar, nicknamed the Aurora. These things had the ability to be just about anywhere in the world 30 minutes after lunch, with the capability of 121 nuclear warheads, probably 10 to 15 megaton weapons, a tactical type nuclear reentry vehicle. So, getting back to Brad's story at Norton Air Force Base, one of the other things he said was that after they showed them all of these aircraft, they had a big black curtain that divided the hangar into 2 different areas. Behind these curtains was another big area, and inside this area they had all the lights turned off. So they go in and they turn the lights on, and there are 3 flying saucers floating off of the floor, no cables suspended from the ceiling holding them up, no landing gear underneath, just floating, hovering above the floor. They had little exhibits with a videotape running, showing the smallest of the 3 vehicles sitting out in the desert, presumably over a dry lake bed someplace like Area 51. It showed this vehicle making 3 little quick hopping motions, then it accelerated straight up and out of sight, completely disappearing from view in just a couple of seconds. No sound, no sonic boom, nothing. They had cutaway illustration that showed what the internal components of this vehicle were, and they had some of the panels taken off so you could actually look in and see oxygen tanks and a little robotic arm that could extend out from the side of the vehicle for collecting samples and things. And it's using a type of propulsion system that doesn't make any noise. As far as he could see, it had no moving parts and didn't have any exhaust gases or fuel to be expended. It was just there hovering. He listened intently and collected as much information as he could, and when he came back, he told me how he had seen these 3 flying saucers in his hangar at Norton Air Force Base on November 12, 1988. It was a Saturday. He said that the smallest was somewhat bell-shaped. They were all identical in shape and proportion, except that there were 3 different sizes. The smallest, at its widest part, was flat on the bottom, somewhat bell-shaped, and had a dome or a half of a sphere on top. The sides were sloping at about a 35-degree angle from pure vertical. The panels that were around the skirt had been removed so he could see one of these big oxygen tanks inside. He was very specific in describing the oxygen tanks as being about 16 to 18 inches in diameter, about 6 feet long, and they were all radially oriented like the spokes of a wheel. This dome that was visible on the top was actually the upper half of a big sphere-shaped crew compartment that was in the middle of the vehicle, And around the middle of this vehicle was actually a large plastic casting that had this big set of copper coils in it. He said it was about 18 inches wide at the top and about 8 to 9 inches thick. He had maybe 15 to 20 stacked layers of copper coils inside of it. The bottom of the vehicle was about 11 or 12 inches thick. In both cases, the coil and the large disc at the bottom were like a big plastic casting, sort of a greenish blue clear plastic, or it might have been glass. I determined, using my conceptual artist skills, that there were exactly 48 sections like thin slices of pizza pie, and each section within this casting probably weighed 4 or 5 tons, judging by the thickness and the diameter. It must have been monstrous in weight. It was full of half-inch thick copper plates, and each of the 48 sections had 8 copper plates. So, here we are back to the plate capacitors again, and the prospect of someone finding a way to use the Byfield-Brown effect, this levitation effect where you charge a capacitor to lift towards a positive plate. Now, when you've got 8 plates stacked up in there, they alternate. It goes negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive 4 times. So you ultimately wind up with the positive plates always being above a set of negative plates as you go up. On the inside of the crew compartment was a big column that ran down through the middle, and there were 4 ejection seats mounted back to back on the upper half of this column. Then, right in the middle of the column was a large flywheel of some kind. This craft was what they call the alien reproduction vehicle. It was also nicknamed the Fluxliner. This anti-gravity propulsion system, this flying saucer, was one of 3 that were in this hangar at Norton Air Force Base. Its synthetic vision system used the same kind of technology as the gun-slaving system they have in the Apache helicopter. If the pilot wants to look behind him, he can pick a view in that direction, and the cameras slew in pairs. The pilot has a little screen in front of his helmet, and it gives him an alternating view. He also has a little set of glasses that he wears. In fact, you can actually buy a 3D viewing system for your video camera now that does this same thing. So when he looks around, he has a perfect 3D view of the outside, but no windows. So, why do they have no windows? Well, it's probably because the voltages that we're talking about being used in this system were probably something between, say, 500,000 and 1,000,000 volts of electricity. Now, he said there were 3 vehicles. The first one, the smallest, the one that was partially taken apart, the one that was shown in the video that was running in this hangar November 12, 1988 at Norton Air Force Base, was about 24 feet in diameter at its widest part right at the base. The next biggest one was 60 feet in diameter at the base. Now I started looking at the design of this thing, and it occurred to me that what I was looking at was a huge Tesla coil, which is kind of like an open-air transformer. What happens is that when you pass electricity through this large diameter coil, it creates a field. That's what this system does. It takes electricity using 2 large 24-volt marine-style batteries. You basically use that to somehow put an alternating current through these windings. Then you step up that electricity through the secondary coil, which is on the column in the middle, and you get this extremely high voltage. You can selectively put the voltage on any of these 48 capacitor sections. Well, why would you want to do that? If you're using just a normal Tesla coil, you usually have maybe 1 or 2 capacitors in the whole system. But you're talking about a different type of capacitor here. You're talking about capacitors that are made up of plates that are shaped like long, thin triangles, and they are all radially oriented just like the spokes of a wheel, just like the oxygen tanks, just like the field lines from that large diameter coil. As you look at this system, if you're an electrician or just somebody who knows a little bit about Tesla coils and the way they are set up, you begin to realize that the orientation of components is really the key to making the system work. Why so many different capacitor sections? If you just have one big disk like Mark Stambo did with his experiment at the University of Arizona, which by the way was confiscated by men claiming to be from the government and claiming privilege under the National Security Act. They took all this stuff, interviewed all the people that saw the experiments, and told everybody to keep their mouth shut and not to talk about it. But I heard about it from his roommate who knew what had happened. Anyway, in that case, you have levitation, but you don't get any control. You have this thing floating around, and it's just sort of floating on whatever this field is that it's producing, but you don't have any control. So what happens? You break that disk up into 48 different sections, and then you can decide how much electricity you want to put on this side or over there on that side. So you can control the amount of electricity and the amount of thrust and vectoring that you get. You can make it go straight up. You can make it bank and turn and pitch whatever you want to by virtue of the fact that you could control where the electricity goes in those 48 different sections. If you ever take a circle and divide it up into 48 equal sections, you will find that those are really thin little slices. So you have these 48 individual capacitors and you have one big Tesla coil. You've got to have some kind of a rotating spark gap, just like the distributor in your car that sends the electricity out to each of those sections. Then you have to have some way of controlling how much electricity goes to each one. A disc-shaped craft like this has omnidirectional movement. It isn't limited to moving in one direction like a jet with a nose and a tail. Now, when Brad described the control system, he said that on the one side, there was this big high voltage potentiometer. It's like a rheostat, a bit controller. It allows you to put progressively more electricity through the system as you push the lever. On the other side of the control system, there was a sort of metallic bar that came up like a stork's neck, and right at the very tip of it was a sort of metallic-looking ball. Attached to that ball was a kind of bowl that seemed to just hang off the bottom of the ball, almost like it was magnetically attached to it. He said the whole thing would just sit there, and it would kind of rock and list, almost like a large ship at anchor in a harbor on the ocean, floating on the water. It was literally on a sea of energy. In one portion of this documentary, moments in time are thought of as slices of bread in a very long loaf. I wanted to expound on that concept where Dr. Brian Greene was trying to explain the nature of time, where he said each of the bread slices corresponds to the slice behind it and before it, but none other. And if you walk along the loaf, you can pluck out a slice from anywhere, and that slice will be the present. All of the slices before it represent the future, and all of the slices behind it are the past. I want to talk about this concept. I think it's very interesting. Here I have slices of bread just so we can get an idea of how Dr. Brian Greene wanted us to view time. And to compare this with ancient cosmology, when he talks about time being divided up into bread slices, any slice you pick is the present, and every slice behind it is the past, every slice in front of it is the future. This means that the human consciousness itself represents the present. When you rearrange the word present, you get serpent. And that serpent is the kundalini. represented by the consciousness, the central nervous system. Time isn't something that is functioning independently in the universe. It's something that exists as a result of consciousness. Albert Einstein once said, time is relative. Its only worth depends upon what we do as it is passing. And if you think about that statement, what he's saying is that time fly when you having fun. We control how fast or slow time moves based upon our perception, which makes time subjective. This means time is not absolute. I find it very interesting that Dr. Brian Greene compares time to slices of bread in a loaf, because the ancestral understanding of time, when you compare it to what Dr. Brian Greene said, their version of these slices of bread would be netters or dimensional planes. Each of these dimensional planes is a checkpoint in time. If we're in a simulation, just like a video game, there will be checkpoints at different levels, saving your progression or lack of. The word check is also the root word of chakra. The word chakra is related to the word chakra, dealing with a check mark, a symbol of completion, or a milestone. So the chakras are basically gateways within the self that lead to different points in time. These are the highways of time travel. For example, right? If you were to dream that you were 10 years old again, in that dream, you would be in the present. So if you were to go back in time, anywhere you go back in time, when you get there, it won't be the past. It'll be the present from your point of perspective. This is the nature of time. So going forward in time, or going or traveling into the future from the year 2024, when you get to the future, it won't be the future when you get there. It will be the present. And where you traveled from will now be the past. So the past, present, and future is dictated by our location within time. And when we say time is not absolute, moving through time is different than moving through your city or neighborhood. If I see a destination in front of me, when I get to that destination, it will still be that destination. It will be whatever it was before I got there. For example, if I see a store ahead and I walk to that store, when I get to it, I will indeed be at the store. But this is not the nature of time. If I want to move forward in time to a set destination, when I get to that set destination, it won't be a forward point in time. It'll be a present point in time. So this is to show you an example of how time is not absolute like a geographic location. When you traveling in time, when you get to the future, again, it won't be the future. It'll be the present when you get there. Time changes based upon our location and observation of it. And one way you can test this is to just stare at a clock and watch how slow time drags. This happened when I was in school a lot. I would say, man, I gotta quit looking at the clock, because the more I look at the clock, the slower time goes. Time is perception. So if you can get your mind off the clock and ignore it and focus on something else, when you look up, hella time has passed. So this is the tricky nature of time. Is not absolute. A minute to me is not a minute to you. You put 10 people in a room and you let an hour pass. Some people will say it felt like 20 minutes. Some people will say it felt like a whole day to them. So time has a lot to do with our perception, which is why it's not absolute, which is what made the idea of time travel possible to many ancient cultures. It was something they took serious. So Dr. Brian Greene comparing time to slices of bread is no different than the ancestors slicing up time into what's called netters or dimensional planes, as you can see on the screen here. So whenever we're dreaming or astral traveling and all of this stuff, we're leaving a dimensional plane of time traveling to other ones. I'll give you another example of how this works. I dreamed that I simply was walking down the street with some family members. And the walk only took 15 minutes in the dream. It was a very short walk just down the street. But that was the entire dream. Now, when I woke up, I was asleep for 8 to 9 hours. But in the dream, it was only a walk down the street. So when we leave this dimensional plane, time speeds up. And scientists have done experiments to show that a clock that's raised off of the ground goes slower than a clock on the ground. Weird, isn't it? Go research it. The higher you raise a clock, the slower it goes. And if you think about this concept, it was said that at the highest peak in our universe, time doesn't exist. So time can indeed be manipulated. I think it's interesting that time was compared to slices of bread by Dr. Greene, because as we do our syncretism here and make our esoteric connections, one popular deity of all time and a God that split time, his name was Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is a deity which is responsible for why time is separated between BC, AD, and etc. So, like other similar gods, Christ is a form of Chronos or Saturn. He is a master and God of time and a manipulator of time, which is why he told his disciples, I will be with you even unto the ends of the world and even throughout all the ages. Speaking as a time traveler, one that has conquered time and is not bound to it. Maybe this is all of our ultimate fate. But as we think about Christ and him breaking the bread, which is a very famous gesture that we do in the church, in Christian art, the breaking of the bread. What is so symbolic about Christ breaking the bread? It's the fact that in antiquity, Christ is responsible for the dispensation of time. And how this plays out in modern literature is that the world ends with the coming of the Christ. Every time the earth is destroyed and rebuilt, it's because the Christ has returned again. So the role of Christ in mythology is the God of the reset, the God of destroy and rebuild. And if you think about it, this role actually gives the deity the responsibility of dispensing time or the ages. And how this deity distributes time is in cycles or slices or endings. So as time progresses, there are slices or cuts in time that are signified by the coming of the Christ. So if time is represented by a loaf of bread that is sliced up, then the one that is doing the slicing is Jesus Christ. And that's why I'm showing this collage, because the image shows us something deeper than what's on the surface. The significance of Christ breaking the bread is the very same significance of why Dr. Brian Greene explained time by using slices of bread. Christ, or Chronos, is the one that slices up time, aka the ripper, ripping up time into slices, into ages, into dimensions, into days, into weeks, into years. So this is the one that is quantizing time and making it into a quantity, with time being compared to a loaf of bread that is sliced up into several slices. We also have to compare this not only to the dimensional planes, but we also have to compare this to the human chakra layers, because each of these layers reside on their own respective dimensional plane. So the Earth tetrahedron would represent us going backwards in time or to the past. The solar tetrahedron will represent us going forward in time or to the future. And when they both come together, that represents the present. So moving up is going into the future, moving down is going to the past. But when you get to your destination, it won't be the future or the past. It will always be the present from your perspective. So this is why Dr. Brian Greene said, any slice you pick on that loaf will be the present, and every slice behind it becomes the past, and every slice in front of it now becomes the future. You can pick another slice, and that slice will now be your new present point, and the past will be behind it, the future in front of it, because we represent the present, the observer. Wherever we are, that point in time becomes the present. We are separating the past and the future by our intermediary position in between the two as a conscious observer. And a lot of this concept is tied up into the double slit experiment. So when we reach the highest point in the universe, there is no time. At this peak, at this highest point in the universe, this is actually where time is being dispensed. So if you look at the collage I have on the screen here, the ripple effect in the bottom right corner represents what I'm saying. At the central point, or the highest point, the dispensation of the ripples is taking place. We're in an expanding universe, and time is expanding from the center outward, which means time becomes more and more real as we move away from the center point. So this great fall that the Bible speaks of represents humanity falling into the world of chronos, or time. And that was made clear when God told Adam and Eve, now you will age and you will die. And aging and death is a direct result of time. Before that, there was no aging, there was no death. And many ancestors say that the closer we get to the North Pole, the more time slow down. So many people wrote about the North Pole as this fountain of youth, that when you take a trip to the North Pole, you can be there for 3 years. But when you come back here, only a few minutes still have passed. So it was possible for you to live 50, 60 years in this area, slowing down time, prolonging your life indefinitely. They even referred to the North Pole as the tree of life, the fountain of youth. At some point in the documentary, there was a point where we talked about a group of scientists pressing for time, and they were doing an experiment. And if these scientists were to take their pen and pads inside of an electromagnetic energy field, they would be able to take their time and work on their project for hours and hours and hours. But when they left that energy field, only a few minutes would have passed outside of the energy field. So time can be warped. Time can be warped. It can be manipulated. This is something that the Nazis knew in the 40s. This is something that all of the Operation Paperclip scientists knew about. This is one of the reasons that we went into World War II. Nikola Tesla talked a lot about manipulating time, and he developed technology to do just that. When we talk about some of the mechanisms that will make this technology possible, one thing that comes up that is used in the Glock device are the two counter-rotating cylinders. These two counter-rotating cylinders are called the yin and the yang to a lot of ancients, one going clockwise, one going counterclockwise. In Freemasonry, they are called Joachim and Boaz. 6-9 is another way we talk about them. Sun and moon are the two counter-rotating cylinders inside of our thermofusion reactor that we call Earth. Yes, we're in a huge Vimana. And the two counter-rotating cylinders are the sun and moon. The two counter-rotating cylinders, they will manifest into the two DNA strands on a vibratory level. Remember, you need these same two polarizing cylinders playing out as mama and daddy to open up this vortex. This is what we're talking about, vortex technology. So think about how a tornado is formed with two counter-rotating winds. We're talking about taking two things that are in polarity to each other and bringing them together in unison, in harmony, to create perpetual motion. This will lead into concepts of free energy. This simple concept of blending polarity is the foundation behind the human auric field, or AKA the Merkaba, the tetrahedron. Time itself is moving forward and backwards at the same time, like a dual highway system, creating a solar tetrahedron and an earth tetrahedron. And both of these are what we're calling the DNA. This is the energy that is flowing, is moving from the bottom up through the body and from the top down through the body. Your root energy and crown energy, solar energy and earth energy. The way that this energy calls itself through the body is just like a Tesla coil wrapped around a pole. And this is why we see the serpent wrapped around the spinal cord. So this simple concept of polarity to create gateways or portals or vortexes is exactly what's happening as I speak, in order for your consciousness to be observing this very moment in time. At one point in the documentary, we spoke about the Tipler cylinder. The Tipler cylinder actually solved the Einstein equation for the gravitational field of a rapidly spinning infinite cylinder. It was shown that such a field violates causality in a sense that it allows a closed timeline to connect to any 2 points in space-time. This suggests that a rotating cylinder could act as a time machine. The interesting thing about that is that each human being, the soul within us, is an infinite being of energy that is not bound to time. Every single human is a living time machine. And when you think about what's required to create a time machine or to allow time travel, any kind of technology that would allow a wormhole or a vortex to be open, to rip through the fabric of creation, space-time. One of those mechanisms that was able to do that was a Tipler cylinder. But all of the mechanisms that's able to open up a wormhole and allow for time travel, they all resemble what we are as human beings. And it's all based upon how divine we are. We're being reverse engineered. So for example, right, the Tipler cylinder can be compared to the central nervous system, the part of us that acts as an elevator for consciousness to travel the different points in time. The Tipler cylinder is also what we call the barber pole. If you ever look at how the barber pole moves, it's like DNA strands. This is the Kundalini energy. You have red and blue. You have blue going up, red going down. This creates a vortex. This is how you get your Pepsi Cola symbol, which is just another throw off from the yin yang symbol, showing you this red and blue or black and white, night and day, man and woman, 6-9 polarizing energy. Tipler cylinder is a cylinder of dense matter of infinite length. Why is it infinite length? Because the cylinder is formed due to think about a tornado tail. A tornado tail is formed via a vortex, 6-9 wind. And the stronger the winds get, the longer the tail grow. If there was nothing to stop the growth of a tornado tail, being the ground, then the tail could grow indefinitely. If we're dealing with a tornado that's being fed an infinite amount of energy or indefinite amount of energy. So when we talk about a cylinder of infinite length, this was told in the Bible as the Babel Tower. Notice that the Babel Tower shapes like a cylinder and it goes up forever. There's a math concept called the Infinity Hotel. And the Infinity Hotel concept, it dives into the nature of infinity, free energy, and how space is infinite. So the Infinity Hotel is a modern concept that would have been taught in parable in the old days. And that's what the Babel Tower was all about. The Tipler cylinder is basically Tipler reverse engineering the North Pole, which is a rapidly spinning infinite cylinder, aka the center of magnetism, aka a hyperboloid. So the Tipler cylinder is a cylinder of dense matter of infinite length, rotating about its longitudinal axis. The rotation of this massive cylinder would create a frame dragging effect. This frame dragging effect would warp the space-time in such a manner that it would allow for past time travel. The problem with Tipler cylinder is that it would require negative energy for its stability, or else it would collapse into a black hole. Another very interesting point that was mentioned was when you take a system like this and you fire it up, everything in the system starts to become mass canceled. Mass cancellation is a very interesting concept because it explains the non-mass mass paradox of the holosphere. So we measure mass at a surface level and we weigh it and we can detect it. But the more we zoom in on any structure with mass, the less mass appear. This led to early concepts that physical objects aren't really physical, but a bunch of quote unquote atoms that are vibrating. Now, I don't really subscribe to that theory. When we understand the nature of a holographic simulation, we replace the word atom with pixel. We understand that everything is light being projected. And now we must explore concepts of holography to understand the nature of reality. When the system gets hyperbolic, right, when it reaches a certain threshold, it becomes mass cancel. That means that no matter how much the thing weight, it becomes weightless. If you look at the way that these objects are moving, that is how things can move if they are mass canceled. They're not bound by their own weight. Now, agencies like NASA want us to believe that this is the nature of space and that things are weightless or mass canceled, if you will. But space isn't a place that we go to reach mass cancellation. It's the warping of space that allow a thing of mass to become mass canceled, as we are learning. So the entire universe has a weight, but because it is vibrating at a certain threshold, it becomes mass canceled. This is a paradox in and of itself. A paradox that shows the mass and non-mass nature of reality. We experience weight, we experience density, but on a macro level, the entire universe weighs nothing. So this paradox is created within the Vimana technology, allowing it to mimic the factors in play that allow the universe to have this mass, non-mass paradox or mass cancellation. When we compare this again to the Earth and solar tetrahedron, the technology is built within our soul. The Earth and the solar tetrahedron are the 6-9 polarizing forces that reach this hyperbolic state to where we become mass canceled. And this allows the soul to ascend and travel like a Vimana in ways that are not bound to weight or time or the physical boundaries that govern an airplane or a car. So if you look at how these objects are moving, this shows the nature of consciousness moving through the heavens as a weightless, boundless entity, going in any direction it wants, just not bound to or limited to any barrier restrictions such as time, weight, or mass. All of that becomes canceled and we become limitless. I can't help but see how this Vimana is built the same way that the ley lines of the earth is built. The earth could be a huge Vimana that is parked and locked stationary in a magnetic sort of cast all around it, preventing it from going upside, just locking it in. In the documentary, there were several people who were involved in this secret research that talked about these Vimanas just sort of being locked in place, like levitating on a sea of magnetism and just sitting there in a fixed position. And they right themselves and just sort of lock into place. Magnetism is very powerful. One of the main liquids that they use in this thing is called thorium. And remember that the god Thor is the god of magnetism. So this circle divided up into 48 slices also reminds me of the black hole sun. And when it go to spinning, now we get the vortex symbol, which becomes the swastika, the CERN symbol, and all of this stuff. So when we talk about how these slices are all basically ley lines coming from the center pole, we can understand that all of this technology involved in this Vimana is based on a Tesla coil. And all of that is based upon the earth, the North Pole, the central nervous system. Is all based upon field lines generated from a central coil. That's no different than ley lines that are being generated from the North Pole on an AE map. So another one of the features that was involved in making this device work was a portion of the device that you see on the screen, which is a series of concentric phase shells. So if you look at these phase shells, the most inner circle is one that represents burning plasma. After that, we get the first wall, then the breathing blanket, then we get a shield, then we get the vacuum vessel wall, then we get the superconducting magnet and cryogenic chamber. Then we get a biological shield. If you think of all these layers that are involved, there are 7 of them, and there are 7 chakra layers to the self, and there are 7 nettas to the earth. I believe that the earth is a huge Vimana because after doing my research for this documentary, a lot of the concepts involved in creating time travel and making this enigmatic technology work is based around things that I study all the time as far as ancient cosmology goes. So the series of concentric phase shells, they are called phase shells, meaning each shell represents a different phase that the energy will experience. And if you think about the 7 nettas, each one of them represent a different phase or face. The phases are the faces. Think chakra layers. In each of these dimensional planes, we exist as a different version of the self. So that's the same energy in a different phase or face. And we can compare the earth to this technology. So this series of concentric phase shells is nothing but a ripple effect that's starting from the center, which is the most dense one, which is burning plasma, and then expanding outward to different shells or shields to release the energy from the center in a controlled way, in a way that you can harness it. So this is like looking at a battery from the top down view as well, with the energy at the core of the battery and then your many layers and walls shielding it. So what dictates how many shells you're going to have around this thing is how potent and dense the plasma is at the core. How hot is it burning? The more dense that the core is, the more layers you would add. So this is no different than a ripple effect. This is saying the harder I throw the rock into the water, the more ripples I'm going to get. So that is to say how dense the core is dictates how many layers we will need to harness the energy as it expands from that point of singularity. Be sure to take from this documentary the knowledge of how the government covers this technology up. This is some very spiritual technology. The people with this technology will have God-like abilities, which is why Tesla wanted to destroy these concepts when he realized who he was dealing with, but it was too late. There's so much propaganda out there to hide this advanced ancient technology. And when the powers that be start using this technology on us, they're going to write it off as alien attacks and apocalyptic events, but it would all be part of a planned reset. The governments of the world have cracked the secrets of time travel and more. Do you think they're going to share that with the masses? I don't think so. For years, people have seen weird sightings in the sky. UFOs, or today we call them UAPs, and the phenomena is still alive and well today, if not stronger than it ever was. The technology that we see in our heavens is not alien technology. It's very, very advanced government technology that they can't afford the masses knowing about. So just like we learned in the documentary, we're going to see a lot of alien propaganda from the people in power on the media. And we see a lot of it today. The more they test this technology and implement it and use it, the more we're going to see sightings in the sky. And we may be witnessing the powers that be time travel right before our eyes. The technology that would allow time travel can literally be used right in front of us and we don't know it. So we're looking in the sky and we're thinking we're seeing UFOs. And we're taught that UFOs are basically time travelers because a UFO had to travel light years through the galaxy to get to our world, making it a time traveler. We're basically taught UFOs are time travelers. And what if it's not beings from other worlds, but beings from other dimensional planes, beings from the past, from the future? Artificial intelligence, like we learned in the video, because humans already mastered AI in many different universes in the past and future. Time resets where the past meets the future, and all civilizations will only rediscover the same truth about the nature of time in our reality. This is long lost spiritual technology that they do not want popular in the world. And to hide this in front of everybody's eyes is to create a huge UFO conspiracy, which is genius and sinister. Dr. John Murray did experiments with different kinds of energy, something that may have been scalar energy back in the early 1920s or the 1930s. He wrote a book called The Sea of Energy, and he describes this type of energy. Brad said that when this thing was moving around, the system wasn't energized to its full strength. He said as it would start to list in one direction, as it started to tilt, it would slide over and it would power up the system on that side, and it would bring it back to a righted position all by itself, completely unmanned. It would sit there and it would correct itself just while it was sitting there. One of the things Einstein said was that you can never accelerate anything up to and past the speed of light. If you did, you would have to have all the energy in the universe, because as you accelerate through space, mass increases. One of the old films showing this concept shows a train going faster and faster towards the speed of light, but the train keeps getting bigger and bigger until the engine just can't pull it, so it can never pass the speed of light. But what if you have a system, a device that absorbs that 0-point energy and prevents it from interacting with the atomic structure of the vehicle? And at the same time, it's providing additional power to the capacitor section, this whole electrical system that is going on in the vehicle that's running. In effect, the faster you go, the easier it becomes to go up to and exceed the speed of light. Brad said that in this exhibit at Norton Air Force Base, a 3-star general said that these vehicles were capable of doing light speed or better. Oh, by the way, the largest of these vehicles was about 120 to 130 feet in diameter. I mean, that's massive when you think about it. It's just huge. There's a scientist in Utah by the name of Moray B. King. He wrote a book called Trapping the 0-Point Energy. What he maintains is that this energy is embedded in space-time all around us. It's in everything we see. I think it was James Clerk Maxwell who speculated that there's enough of this flux, this electrical charge in the nothingness of space, that if you could capture all the energy that was embedded in just a cubic yard of space, you would have enough energy to boil the oceans of the entire world. That's how much energy is sitting there waiting to be tapped. Now, one of the things that Moray B. King said was that the best way to tap that energy is by driving it out of equilibrium. It's just like a bunch of cigarette smoke in a box. But if you somehow send a shock wave through it, you can get force. You can get ripples through it. Then, if you have a way of collecting that energy at the other end, you have a way of tapping into it and using it. This alien reproduction vehicle, this flux liner, has a way of doing that somehow, electronically. Now, Brad had described the fact that this central column has a kind of vacuum chamber in it. The vacuum chamber is one of the things that all of these scientists describe in these over unity or free energy devices they build. They all have some kind of vacuum tubes or vacuum technology. Brad maintained that inside this big vacuum chamber, in the central column that's inside everything else, inside the flywheel, inside the secondary coils of the Tesla coil, inside the crew compartment, there is a mercury vapor. Mercury vapor will conduct electricity, but it produces all kinds of ionic effects. These little molecules of mercury become charged in unusual ways, and if you fire a tremendous amount of electricity through mercury vapor that's in a partial vacuum, there is something special, something unusual that happens in that process. I believe it's the process that Moray King came to describe when he proposed driving the energy in the vacuum out of equilibrium, putting some kind of shock wave through it. Now, the other thing that I believe happens here is that as this system begins to tap into this 0-point energy and is drawing it away from the local environment, the whole craft becomes lighter in weight. It becomes partially mass canceled, if you will, which is one of the reasons why just a little bit of energy in the capacitors could shoot it all over the place. One of the things that I believe happens is when you take a system like this and you fire it up, everything in the system starts to become mass canceled. The next thing that happens is that the electrons that are flowing through the system also become mass canceled. What does that mean? It means as that system and all the electrons flowing through that big Tesla coil become mass canceled, it also becomes the perfect superconductor, which means the efficiency of the systems goes right through the ceiling. You get dramatic efficiency, just like the whole thing was dunked into liquid nitrogen or made out of pure silver or pure gold, which at certain temperatures are perfect conductors. It becomes lighter and can accelerate at incredible speeds. The faster it goes, the lighter it gets, and the faster it's able to go. Die Glock, meaning the bell in German, is the name of an alleged top-secret Nazi technological device that is among the most notable of SS General Hans Kammler's ultra-secret arsenal of quote-unquote wonder weapons. Ever since the conclusion of the Second World War, an increasing number of revelations have surfaced regarding various outlandish and even occult-based scientific and technological experiments being conducted by the Nazis throughout the duration of the Third Reich. Die Glock has been considered to be among the most mysterious and intriguing of these revelations, as the potential explanations surrounding the actual purpose of the device range from anti-gravity to interdimensional time travel. Time travel, another feature of Die Glock that has been theorized, is an ability to see through time. This would be done through the use of a convex mirror on the top of a device, theorized by author Henry Stevens. Others have speculated that the bell itself is a time machine, giving the person inside it the capability to move into the past. Theoretically, Hitler himself could have been sent back in time using Die Glocke to found the Nazi Party, ensuring that Die Glocke would be built to send him back in time. Polish researcher Igor Witkowski initially mentioned Die Glocke in 1997, claiming access to classified documents obtained from an anonymous Polish intelligence official. Witkowski transcribed these documents but couldn't make copies. While unverified, his statements gained traction after being recounted in Nick Cook's 2001 book, The Hunt for Zero Point. Witkowski's alleged documents included interrogations of Jacob Sporenberg, a high-ranking Nazi SS official in charge of a special evacuation unit related to Die Glocke's testing site, Der Rise, or the Giant, which is near the Czech border. In an affidavit, Sporenberg admitted to ordering the execution of 60 Nazi scientists involved in the Bell Project, emphasizing its secrecy. The Nazis planned to eliminate evidence if the experiment's location was discovered. Die Glocke is described as being comprised of a dense, heavy metal and having a bell-like shape. The dimensions of the device were roughly 9 feet wide by 12 to 15 feet in height, and it was encased in a ceramic cover. According to Cook's writings, the bell housed a central axis or core around which rotated 2 cylindrical devices that moved in opposite rotation, one clockwise and one counterclockwise. During experiments, these 2 cylinders were filled with a violet-colored substance that had properties similar to mercury. This mysterious metallic liquid carried the code name, quote-unquote, Zerum 525. Various theories have been offered as to what substance this Zerum 525 may have actually been. Some have speculated that it was some type of radioactive isotope of mercury. The most common explanation was that it was mercury antimonate oxide, otherwise known as quote-unquote red mercury, which allegedly has the capability to produce fission explosions equivalent to the power of 1,000 tons of TNT. Once the bell was activated by a high-voltage current, the liquid inside would begin to glow brightly, and the entire device would emit a strong and heavy radiation that produced adverse effects, even leading to the death of several Nazi scientists. Before their deaths, the scientists reportedly suffered from various ailments such as nerve spasms, loss of balance, and a metallic taste in the mouth. Dozens of plant and animal test subjects were also killed by radiation exposure during various experiments. So what exactly was the purpose of the bell? According to Sporenberg's own testimony, Die Glocke was associated with quote-unquote magnetic fields separation and quote-unquote vortex compression. Witkowski asserts that each of these physical principles had become commonly associated with anti-gravity research. According to some physicists, if you have a device that can generate a torsion field of extremely high intensity, it is theoretically possible to quote-unquote bend space around the device. Consequently, by bending space, you also bend time. Could it be possible that the Nazis were utilizing a bell to conduct scientific experiments in time travel? Interestingly enough, it is important to note that the project was codenamed, quote-unquote, Chronos, which means time. Witkowski also claimed that an industrial complex located near the Wenceslas mine became one of the primary testing sites for Die Glocke. The ruins of a mysterious concrete framework known as the hinge stands there today, and many have speculated that the hinge was designed to be a type of suspension rig for use when testing the propulsion capabilities of the bell. Skeptics have dismissed this theory, claiming that the hinge is actually nothing more than the remains of an industrial cooling tower. Die Glocke's fate sparks speculation. with claims suggesting its survival after the Darius test site evacuation in World War II. Witkowski proposes its relocation to a quote-unquote Nazi-friendly South American country, while Cook suggests a transfer to the U.S. through an agreement with General Hans Kammler, who vanished post-war. Author Joseph P. Farrell presents a theory tying Dyglok to the 1965 Kecksburg UFO incident. Witnesses observed a fireball, and in Kecksburg, a mysterious object resembling an acorn with inscriptions was found. The U.S. Army secured the site, but later denied finding anything. Farrell speculates that Kammler used the bell to escape, crash landing in Kecksburg and integrating into society. Amid conjectures, the common thread is Nazi involvement in peculiar World War II experiments. The extent of their scientific progress remains unclear, leaving enigmatic projects like Dyglok shrouded in mystery. Most reports referred to in books that deal with the 1947 flying saucer/UFO wave describes crafts that indicate advanced jet/rocket technology. However, there are examples of other seemingly more advanced things. Some reports describe extreme speeds, jerky movements, angle turns, non-aerodynamic maneuvers, climbing as in quote-unquote stairs, buzzing sound, hints of high voltage, craft enveloped in an intense flare, and etc. These reports are characterized by a type of field propulsion/anti-gravity is involved. Again, Shogun's memorandum must be mentioned. Nuclear propulsion, atomic energy engines would probably be unlike any familiar type of energy, although atomic engines might be employed in combination with any of the above types. The term nuclear propulsion is vague, however. It can mean, and in some cases, probably, it is likely that it means any field propulsion or quote-unquote anti-gravity technology that is based on some form of radioactive isotope to provoke these field effects. My tip is that the UFO phenomenon in 1947 was about a majority of jet turbine-powered saucer-shaped aircrafts, which extraordinary maneuverability and performance were based on eliminating the problem of, quote-unquote, the boundary layer, and thus reduce air resistance and friction. In parallel with these existed a set of probable unstable/unreliable nuclear-powered vessels, one of which crashed near Roswell. The Germans worked to achieve energy independence in the Third Reich. Particularly interesting was alternative, quote-unquote, free energy sources. According to field propulsion and discussions of UFOs, Hans Kohler and Karl Schappler are often mentioned regarding projects including coils, magnets, and rotation. The Majestic 12 documents, even though they are questionable documents that have been quote-unquote leaked, and we do not know the source, Joseph P. Farrell's viewpoint on page 285 deserves attention. Number one, an authentic level where the technical descriptions of the Roswell wreckage are summarized. Here is a gap between the description of the technology and what one would expect from the descriptions of a technology of extraterrestrial origin. Conversely, there exists detailed parallels between the technology as it is described and various quote-unquote black projects from Nazi Germany. Number two, a level of disinformation where the emerging quote-unquote ET explanation forms a deep cover layer of disinfo behind the official explanation about a crash weather/project mogul balloon. In this context, it is worth mentioning another majestic 12 document, the 16th of July 1947 air accident report by General Nathan Twining to headquarters. This one is from July immediately after the crash occurred. Number 1. As ordered by presidential directive dated the 9th of July 1947, a preliminary investigation of a recovered quote-unquote flying disc and remains of a possible second disc was conducted by the senior staff of this command. The data furnished in this report was provided by the engineering staff personnel of T2 and Aircraft Laboratory Engineering Division T3. Additional data was supplied by the scientific personnel of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, CIT, and the Army Air Force's Scientific Advisory Group, headed by Dr. Theodore von Karman. Further analysis was conducted by personnel from research and development. Number 2, it is the collective view of this investigative body that the aircraft recovered by the Army and Air Force units near Victoria Peak and Socorro, New Mexico, are not of U.S. manufacture for the following reasons. The circular disc-shaped platform design does not resemble any design currently under development by this command nor of any Navy project. The lack of any external propulsion system, power plant, intake, exhaust either for propeller or jet propulsion warrants this view. The inability of the German scientists from Fort Bliss and White Sands Proving Ground to make a positive identification of a secret German V weapon out of these discs. Though the possibility that the Russians have managed to develop such a craft remains. The lack of any markings, ID numbers, or instructions in Cyrillic has placed serious doubt in the minds of many that the objects recovered are not of Russian manufacture either. Upon examination of the interior of the aircraft, a compartment exhibiting a possible atomic engine was discovered. At least this is the opinion of Dr. Oppenheimer and Dr. von Karman. A possibility exists that part of the craft itself comprises the propulsion system, thus allowing a reactor to function as a heat exchanger and permitting the storage of energy into a substance for later use. This may allow the converting of mass into energy, unlike the release of energy of our atomic bombs. The description of the power room is as follows. Number 1. A donut-shaped tube approximately 35 feet in diameter made of what appears to be a plastic material surrounding a central core. This tube was translucent, approximately 1 inch thick. The tube appeared to be filled with a large rod centered inside the tube, was wrapped in a coil of what appears to be copper material, ran through the circumference of the tube. This may be the reactor control mechanism or storage battery. There were no moving parts discernible within the power room. This activation of an electrical potential is believed to be the primary power to the reactor, though it is only a theory at present. Just how a heavy water reactor functions in this environment is unknown. Underneath the power plant was discovered a ball turret approximately 10 feet in diameter. This turret was encompassed by a series of gears that has an unusual ratio not known by any of our engineers. On the underside of the turret were 4 circular cavities coated with some smooth material not identified. These cavities are symmetrical but seem to be movable. Just how is not known. The movement of the turret coincides with the dome-shaped cupola compartment above the power room. It is believed that the main propulsion system is a modeless turbine similar to current development now underway at AMC and the Mogul project. A possible theory was devised by Dr. August Steinhoff, Dr. Werner von Braun, and Dr. Theodor von Karman. As the craft moves through the air, it somehow draws the oxygen from the atmosphere and by an induction process generates an atomic fusion reaction. The air outside the craft would thus be ionized, thus propelling the craft forward. Coupled with the circular airfoil for lift, the craft would presumably have an unlimited range and airspeed. This may account for the reported absence of any noise and the apparent blue flame often associated with rapid acceleration. On the deck of the power room, there are what resembles typewriter keys, possibly reactor/power plant controls. There were no conventional electronics, not wiring to be seen connecting these controls to the propulsion turret. There is a flight deck located inside the cupola section. It is round and domed at the top. The absence of canopy, observation windows/blisters, or any optical projection lends support to the opinion that this craft is either guided by remote viewing or is remotely controlled. Number 1, a semicircular photo tube array, possibly television. Number 2, crew compartments were hermetically sealed via a solidification process. Number 3, no weld marks, rivets, or soldered joints. Number 4, craft components appear to be molded and pressed into perfect fit. Some key points. If the craft was of extraterrestrial origin, full of ultra-advanced ET technology, why were the 3 German paperclip rocket scientists called in to inspect the wreck? Thinking of U.S. secret projects' potential gain, it would probably have been of interest to shield any ET technology from the Germans and their possible contacts 2 years after the war ended. So in other words, when the Germans were called in to inspect the remainings of the craft, it may be taken as an indication that the technology seemed man-made and of German origin. Although the Germans were unable to identify the technology as something associated with German V weapons, they were able to propose a rather radical form of propulsion mechanism for the craft, and consequently they must at least have had some suspicions about its origin. Nearly all technological descriptions in the document has an quote-unquote man-made character, a plastic tube 2.5 centimeters in diameter filled with a substance that seems to be water, a coil copper material. Furthermore, there is talk of a heavy water reactor and that the German paperclip scientists already are thinking of a nuclear fusion reactor rather than a fission reactor. Thinking of the equipment described, it seems a process something like cold fusion. Something resembling typewriter keys are mentioned in connection with the description of a possible quote-unquote power plant control, and further a quote-unquote ball turret component is mentioned, accompanied by a series of gears with an unusual ratio unknown to the Americans. All in all, there is very little in quote-unquote the air accident report document that suggests something extraterrestrial, but rather very much pointing in a direction of technology that the Nazis tried to perfect during the war. As mentioned previously, General Skogan and his intelligence agents speculated about the possibility of nuclear propulsion. In other words, nuclear-powered UFOs in 1947. The paperclip experts Steinhoff, von Braun, and Karman describes a type of propulsion where oxygen from the atmosphere is drawn into the craft when it moves through the air, and also a process in which a nuclear fusion reaction is formed so that the air outside the craft is ionized and thus drives the vessel forward. As previously mentioned, it is my opinion that the term nuclear propulsion is similar to field propulsion, quote-unquote anti-gravity, when the technology is based on a radioactive isotope to provoke these field effects. It may appear that both the official government documents, which of course are undoubtedly authentic, and also the more dubious Majestic 12 documents, which probably contains a bit of authentic information mixed with a portion of disinfo, largely supports the claim that the UFO phenomenon is of German origin. If any independent Nazi quote-unquote black project research teams survived the war, and if the Roswell crash provide adequate evidence that such was the case, one can hardly imagine the shockwaves in the Pentagon 2 years after the war ended. As Nick Cook puts it in his book, The Hunt for Zero Point, all the better then to cloak the sensational discovery in a multi-layered disinformation operation, to conceal it behind the ET myth. The bell was probably not a UFO, but perhaps an experiment in cutting-edge physics. It is from several sources claimed that the quote-unquote Bell Project had as one of its aims to examine issues concerning gravity and potentially develop field propulsion / anti-gravity as a result of this. The question then becomes whether any results of the Bell Project eventually was used in connection with propulsion of other SS-initiated black projects, such as saucer-shaped aircrafts, which was originally intended for conventional jet / rocket propulsion. The reasoning is roughly as follows. The person or persons who leaked / hoaxed the white-hot intelligence estimate in 1998 may most likely not have obtained information concerning the Bell from Witkowski, since the information was available only from Witkowski's unknown articles in Polish. Witkowski wrote about the Bell long before 1998 and could obviously not have picked information about the Bell fuel from the later MJ-12 document. We then have two completely independent sources on an exotic form of propulsion, which may sound like a form of field propulsion / anti-gravity. The fact that Witkowski mentions beryllium oxides and thorium as elements in detail in quote-unquote RRR Zerum 525 in his early articles in Polish confirms that the MJ-12 document that later mentions the same elements is not fake but real. That the MJ-12 document mentions beryllium and thorium as ingredients in the quote-unquote fuel substantiates that Witkowski was right and that the Bell experiments actually took place. If the details in the MJ-12 document confirms that the technical descriptions in the document are true, then this is evidence that the Roswell incident actually took place. The technical descriptions in quote-unquote the white-hot intelligence estimate suggests that what crashed near Roswell was an aircraft of German origin. The technical descriptions is about unusual and sophisticated but earthly technology. Ignition coil, magnets, electrodes, engine, exhaust pipes, plastic, copper wire, battery, and gearbox, etc. If Tesla hadn't invented and researched everything he did in his time, our technology today would be considerably worse. But is there something more to Tesla? Tesla was a genius, and his inventions and ideas had no boundaries. Over 100 years ago, during the first decade of the 20th century, Tesla filed a request to patent a peculiar aircraft, which he called, quote-unquote, the world's first flying saucer. The methods used in the design of the flying saucer matched the descriptions of those who claimed to have seen a UFO. with a discoidal capacitor with sufficient size to provide enough thrust to fly, while other small capacitors allowed to control the direction of the flying saucer, to which he added a gyroscopic stabilization system and an electric drive control. Tesla was all about the future, and his futuristic flying object was top of the line. The interior of the ship was equipped with flat screens and external video cameras for the pilot's blind spots. No blind spots in Tesla's flying saucer. Tesla's UFO has eyes, and these were made of electro-optical lenses arranged in quadrants, allowing the pilot to see everything. Just like aircraft today, which are designed with massive computers, screens, and monitors, were placed in Tesla's flying saucer on a console where the browser could observe all areas around the vehicle. And Tesla's incredible invention included magnifying lenses, which could have been used without changing positions. Tesla's unusual flying saucer was powered by quote-unquote free energy. Since the aircraft did not include a power source of its own, it needed to be energized by the towers of wireless transmission, Tesla's sources of free energy. Basically, it is an incredibly well-designed aircraft, one that we could actually manage to build today, or have we already built it? What happened to this invention? Why are we not flying Tesla's incredible invention today? While the patent was granted, the UFO, or rather called IFO as it had been identified by the insatiable imagination of Tesla, had a drawback. Since the aircraft did not include an energy source of its own, it needed to be energized by the towers of wireless transmission. This was Tesla's sources of free energy. The lack of funding led to the abandonment of the development of the towers, so eventually the ship also fell into darkness and Tesla's UFO, or rather IFO, was never made. But hold on, never? Actually, don't be so sure, because the U.S. Secret Service seized all patents belonging to Tesla after his death for quote-unquote reasons of national security. Now, if Tesla's ideas were insane, as some had categorized them, why would the United States Secret Service seize the patents for reasons of national security? Let's think about it for a minute. The ideas of the great Nikola Tesla are incredible and, better yet, way ahead of its time. Many of his inventions aimed at contributing toward world peace through free energy access, but governments and financiers of the time did not follow the progress of Tesla's mind. Years later, his groundbreaking models and technological projects were used by the Nazis, not the way he had imagined it. And now numerous of his projects are held by the Secret Service, far away from the eyes of the public. The great German-American theoretical physicist Friedwart Winterberg stated that the generation of giga-electron volt potentials made possible in the ultra-high vacuum of space has the capability of leading to a workable anti-gravity propulsion system for spaceflight. It is the ultra-high vacuum of space by which this can be achieved. And if the spacecraft acting as a capacitor is charged up to the GeV potentials in a total vacuum, it will levitate. If the spacecraft is positively charged against the electron cloud surrounding the craft and with a magnetic field in the order of 10,000 Gauss, it becomes insulated against the Earth's electron cloud up to GeV potentials. The spacecraft and its surrounding electron cloud form a virtual diode with a GeV potential difference. This in turn produces positive magnetic buoyancy or anti-gravity in the spacecraft. This is also the basis of the Bifield-Brown effect and the working mechanism behind the crude electrostatic ion lifters used by amateur experimenters into electrogravitics. U.S. Department of Energy and Department of Defense research conducted by Winterberg and other physicists working on the relationship between plasma and gravity has disclosed a number of interesting and yet publicly unknown facts about the true nature of gravity. This information has been kept secret for over 50 years. The reason there was so many quote-unquote flying saucer sightings in the 50s and 60s is because governments were experimenting with flying saucer technology. T.T. Brown's technology meant free energy through perpetual motion. One of the hottest debates in physics today is over the true nature of space. Is it a luminiferous ether, or is it some abstract 10-dimensional Riemannian construction like Dr. Albert Einstein proposed in his theory of general relativity? If it does indeed require a superdimension construction to explain the physical laws of the universe, one must wonder why this construction could not be replaced by one using real and observable dimensions like width, length, and depth. If, on the other hand, space is a luminiferous ether or some tenuous fluid, then one wonders why the functions of the physical laws of the universe cannot be observed and, hence, translated into a mathematical construct of reality, of three real dimensions with time expressed as a ratio of relative distances and vectors. Strange as it may seem, space has already been properly described right here on Earth as far back as 1954. Space is a fine structure, a tenuous medium, fluid, or field. All gravitational, electromagnetic, and electrostatic phenomena occur as a result of various interactions of energy waves in this fluid space. In pages 172 through 174, 176, 178, and 180 of Scientific American in 1954, a brilliant discussion giving three-dimensional explanations of many nuclear phenomena was conducted by Albert G. Ingalls. Crockwell's explanations offer the only real solution to the apparent paradox which certain nuclear events present to the researcher. A particle sometimes behaves like a wave. The discussion stated, it seems reasonable as a first thought to accept each particle-field relationship as an inseparable something, which is perceived sometimes in one fashion and sometimes in another. We might also think of the particle portion of the effect as that which is experienced radial to the course or potential course. We know that some relationship of this sort exists, whether or not it is exactly as stated. Variation of one effect is accompanied by a reciprocal variation in the other effect. In other words, the more the particle field manifests itself as a particle, the less it manifests itself as a field, and vice versa. We also know that charged particles in motion exhibit a sense or quality of right or left-handedness which characterizes their charges. From this, we can infer a kind of tangential motion in space around the course of a particle, a motion which differs between particles of unlike charge. The discussion went on to say, it is important to remember that the field does not rotate as a unit. The areas of the field vary only in the diameter and the phase of translation. As the field is explored from the center outward, the phase of rotation lags progressively. Hence, its structure can be considered as a series of concentric phase shells, each 360 degrees out of step with adjoining neighbors. The field and particle are one, and at all points the action is similar. The diameter of translation is greatest when the particle is at relative rest. An increase of particle field velocity is accompanied by an increased rate of rotation but a smaller radius of rotation. The summary statements of the discussion brought out a very interesting point about James Clerk Maxwell, the Einstein of the 19th century. I submit a line from the great James Clerk Maxwell's preface to his theory of electromagnetic radiation. In several parts of this treatise, an attempt has been made to explain electromagnetic phenomena by means of a mechanical action. A very common phenomenon illustrates Crockwell's model particle field concept. If one blows a weak smoke ring, it moves slowly away in a rapidly widening ring. If, however, one blows a strong smoke ring, it moves away rapidly, maintaining a very small diameter. If a person nearby was struck by the later smoke ring, the impulse or particle effect would be more obvious than the tangential expansion pressure on the ring. On the other hand, if that some person was struck by the first smoke ring of less translational energy, it would not be felt as a direct impact so much as an expanding crawl over the individual's person. Although it would prove a bit difficult in practice, one could theoretically shoot two smoke rings at each other so that their encounter would produce either mutual annihilation or mutual enhancement, dependent upon the rotation vector applied to each ring as it left the issuing orifice. The annihilation would produce a visual effect like a barred spiral galaxy, while the enhancement would produce a visual effect like the sombrero galaxy. The reader who is keenly interested in the mechanics of gravity and electromagnetism must pursue the preceding lines of thought to properly understand the missing link which unites the physical laws of the microcosm with those of the macrocosm. If one views space as an infinite existence, a continuum comprised of endless levels of subnuclear particle fields forming atoms, forming planetary systems which form galaxies that in turn form galactocells and etc., ad infinitum, then one can easily visualize that the ether of man's particular level of existence is a fluid comprised of ultra-small particle fields, which in turn are made up of relatively equally small particle fields. Time, as such, in a continuum of such magnitude is equally relative. Time is not an absolute dimension in reality. The only absolute is energy. The distribution of energy within the various levels of the hierarchy of existence creates the phenomenon called time. As the distribution of energy is not uniform, time itself is not uniform in the universe. When a person says it took him 5 seconds to walk across a room, he is really saying a clock pendulum moved or changed its energy distribution level 5 times as compared to his own single change of energy distribution made by his walk across the room. Time is a ratio of changes in energy density. Time on an atom passes much faster than time at the earth level does. If a person's body were to be pumped with resonant energy, it would make him age several days in only a few relative minutes to someone watching him. If, however, the person were to be drained with resonant energy, it would lower his energy density, causing him to age only a few minutes in several relative days of the observer's time. How incredible it would be. Suppose a group of scientists had to solve a very time-dependent problem in a hurry. If they were to take their pencils and paper with themselves into a field which harmonically pumped their energy densities to a higher level, time would extend for them. They would have several relative days to solve their problem, while only a few relative minutes of time had passed to the world outside their field. Fascinating, isn't it? If the American base at Pine Gap could be used to pump resonant, low-frequency energy into certain circles of the country, the effects could be mind-boggling. Why, in just a few days of time relative to the rest of the world, certain parts of Australia could pass several years of time relative to its occupants. Has the reader ever had those days that seem to fly by? On the other hand, if the same facility could be used to drain energy from those same circles of influence, the days would seem to drag by to those so influenced. If an electric, air, or spacecraft based on the same principle of resonance were to be suddenly accelerated into a new vector at speeds which would normally break its molecular lattice apart, a relative or apparent 35G acceleration could be easily amortized over a relative time dilation of 1 to 35 inside the field of the craft, giving the craft and its crew the relative acceleration of only 1G. If the reader has been able to grasp the preceding dissertation on time and space, he now knows why UFOs have such incredible performance characteristics. They are only relatively incredible. Most great inventions fundamentally change the society in which they exist. Since the people at the top of the social structure have more to gain by reinforcing the status quo, they suppress revolutionary technologies favorable to the world but dangerous to their existence. Engineering genius Nikola Tesla was no exception. Here's some of those technologies they don't want you to know about Nikola Tesla. The death ray. Nikola Tesla claimed to have invented a quote-unquote death beam, which he called Teleforce, in the 1930s. The device was capable of generating an intense targeted beam of energy that could be used to dispose of enemy warplanes, foreign armies, or anything else you would rather didn't exist. The so-called death ray was never constructed because he believed it would become too easy for countries to destroy each other. Tesla proposed that a nation could destroy anything approaching within 200 miles and will provide a wall of power in order to, quote-unquote, make any country, large or small, impregnable against armies, airplanes, and other means for attack. He said that efforts had been made to steal the invention. His room had been entered and his papers had been scrutinized, but the thieves or spies left empty-handed. Tesla's oscillator. In 1898, Tesla claimed he had built and deployed a small oscillating device that, when attached to his office and operating, nearly shook down a building and everything around it. In other words, the device could allegedly simulate earthquakes. Realizing the potential terror such a device could create, Tesla said he took a hammer to the oscillator to disable it, instructing his employees to claim ignorance to the cause of the tremors if asked. Some theorists believe the government continues to use Tesla's research in places like the HARP facility in Alaska. Free electricity system. With funding from J.P. Morgan, Tesla designed and built Wardenclyffe Tower, a gigantic wireless transmission station in New York in 1901 to 1902. Morgan thought the Wardenclyffe Tower could provide wireless communication across the world. However, Tesla had other plans. Tesla intended to transmit messages, telephony, and even facsimile images across the Atlantic to England and to ships at sea based on his theories of using the earth to conduct the signals. If the project worked, anyone could have electricity by simply sticking a rod into the ground. Unfortunately, free electricity is not profitable, and this system could be incredibly dangerous for the global elite because it could profoundly change the energy industry. Imagine how different the world would be if society didn't need oil and coal to function. Could the great world powers maintain control? Morgan refused to fund the changes. The project was abandoned in 1906 and never became operational. The flying saucer. In 1911, Nikola Tesla told the New York Herald that he was working on an anti-gravity flying machine. Tesla claimed, "My flying machine will have neither wings nor propellers. You might see it on the ground and you would never guess that it was a flying machine. Yet it will be able to move at will through the air in any direction with perfect safety, at higher speeds than have yet been reached, regardless of weather and oblivious of quote-unquote holes in the air or downward currents. It will ascend in such currents if desired. It can remain absolutely stationary in the air, even a wind for great length of time. Its lifting power will not depend upon any such delicate devices as the bird has to employ, but upon positive mechanical action. Tesla's flying saucer was powered by free energy systems at a time when the fledgling aviation and motor car industry depended on oil and petroleum. His invention met the same fate as his free energy system. Improved airships. Tesla proposed that electrically powered airships would transport passengers from New York to London in 3 hours, traveling 8 miles above the ground. He also imagined that airships might draw their power from the very atmosphere, never needing to stop for refueling. Unmanned airships might even be used to transport passengers to a pre-selected destination or for a remote aerial strike. He was never given credit for his invention. However, today we have unmanned drones carrying out combat missions, supersonic airplanes that fly at amazing speeds, and space shuttle technology that can circle the Earth in the upper atmosphere. It was long suspected that the FBI literally stole all of his work, research, and inventions that he had in his possession when he died. This rumor has now been confirmed by recent, heavily redacted Freedom of Information Act requests released by the FBI. Let me just say to every last one of you guys, thank you so much. I didn't want to put this on YouTube because it's too much positive talk about Adolf Hitler. And what I've learned as a content creator is you can be banned for talking against Jews, but you can also be banned for talking good about Hitler. So this information kind of paints Adolf Hitler as some sort of tech guru and genius, which he was during his time. He was even in Time magazine while we're talking about time travel, which is ironic, which is kind of crazy. Hitler was a rock star of his time. So what happened? Well, that's a whole nother presentation about the rise and fall of the man behind the technology and how much of Tesla's knowledge was he influenced by. So Nikola Tesla was all about vortex science. And it makes sense that Adolf Hitler adopted the symbol of the swastika, which is an ancient symbol to represent the vortex, wormhole, a portal. But brothers and sisters, again, I want to thank you all. I put a lot of work into this thing, and your purchase helps support my research so that I can continue giving you guys good stuff just like this. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you tell many other people about it. And peace and much love.